It was finally here. My first day in college, the day I dreamed about for years, the day I would officially become a college student. I woke up 2 hours early because I didn't want to be late, of course. I stood in front of the mirror trying to look confident, like one of those people who totally have their life together. I put on my favorite jeans, a white t-shirt, and the denim jacket that always made me feel a little cooler. My mom kept asking if I'd eaten breakfast, and I kept saying, "I'll grab something on the way," but honestly, I was too nervous to eat anything at all. On the way to campus, my heart was racing. The city felt different that morning, bigger, louder, faster. I kept checking Google Maps every 2 minutes, terrified I'd get lost. I probably looked like the most obvious freshman ever with my giant backpack and that "I have no idea where I'm going" face. When I finally got to the campus, it looked even more massive than I'd imagined. There were students everywhere, laughing, running, taking selfies, calling their friends, and somehow looking like they'd been there forever. I took a deep breath and told myself, "Okay, you got this." My first class was English Literature 101, and I was genuinely excited. I've always loved books and stories, and I imagined myself sitting in a warm, bright classroom, talking about novels and poetry with smart, creative people. I found the building, checked the room number on my phone, 204, and climbed the stairs. My hands were shaking just a little, but I smiled. This was it. This was my new life starting. When I walked into the classroom, everyone was already sitting down. The professor was setting up the projector, and people looked focused, serious, like they really knew what they were doing. Wow, I thought, college students mean business. I found an empty seat in the back and sat down quietly. The girl next to me smiled politely and whispered, "Hey, first day." I nodded and said, "Yeah, you too." She shrugged, sort of. "I transferred here last year." That made me feel both impressed and slightly intimidated. But I told myself, "You're doing great. You're blending in." Then the professor spoke, "Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Advanced Physics." Wait, what? For a second, I thought I'd misheard him. Physics. I quickly looked at my schedule again. English Literature 101, Room 204. This was definitely Room 204. I double-checked the sign on the door. It said, Physics 204, Advanced Concepts. My stomach dropped. I wasn't in the right building. I was in the science hall. My face turned red instantly. I could feel heat rushing to my ears. The girl next to me must have noticed my panic because she leaned closer and whispered, "You okay?" I whispered back, "I think I'm in the wrong class." She smiled and tried not to laugh. "Happens all the time," she said softly. But that didn't make me feel any better. The professor was already writing complicated equations on the board. Everyone was watching. I waited for a pause, grabbed my bag slowly, and stood up. My chair made the loudest sound in the world. Heads turned. People stared. I whispered, "Sorry," and tried to leave as quietly as possible, but it was impossible to be quiet. When I finally got out, I stood in the hallway, breathing heavily, my heart pounding like I'd just run a marathon. I wanted to disappear. I checked my phone again and realized my English literature class was actually in Building B, not Building C. I laughed at myself. "Of course," I said out loud. Classic freshman move. Still, I was embarrassed. I'd spent weeks dreaming about my first day in college, and within the first hour, I'd walked into the wrong classroom. But deep down, a small voice whispered, "It's okay. It's just the beginning." And it was true. I didn't know it yet, but that small, awkward moment would become one of my favorite college stories ever. The moment I stepped out of that wrong classroom, I felt like every single person on campus somehow knew what had just happened. Of course, nobody actually cared, but my brain was screaming, "They're all laughing at you." I took a deep breath and started walking, pretending to look confident even though I had no idea where Building B was. My map app said it was only a 5-minute walk, but it felt like a marathon. The sun was hot, my backpack was heavy, and my coffee had already gone cold. I couldn't stop replaying the scene in my head, me standing up, everyone staring, the sound of that stupid chair screeching across the floor. My inner voice kept saying, "Congratulations, you've officially become the freshman meme of the day." I tried to shake it off. I passed a group of students sitting on the grass, laughing and eating bagels, and I thought, how are they so chill? Do they already know everything? I looked at them and imagined myself joining their circle one day, laughing like that, feeling like I belonged. But right then, I felt like an outsider, like a lost tourist in a foreign country. I walked faster, determined to at least make it to my real class on time. On the way, I passed a big fountain where some students were taking photos, and I stopped for a second to breathe. The sound of the water was calming. I looked around and realized how beautiful the campus actually was. The tall trees, the old red brick buildings, the sound of music coming from somewhere far away. And I thought, okay, maybe this isn't so bad. Maybe getting lost is part of the experience. Just as I was starting to feel a bit better, a guy on a skateboard zoomed past me, nearly knocking me over. "Sorry," he shouted, and I laughed awkwardly, clutching my bag. He turned around, still rolling, and said, "First day." I smiled and nodded. "How did you know?" He grinned. The confused look. Classic freshman vibe. I laughed for real that time. "Yeah, I just walked into the wrong class," I admitted. He slowed down and said, "Don't worry, I did that last year. Ended up in organic chemistry by mistake. Worst 50 minutes of my life." That made me feel a lot better. "Thanks," I said, waving as he rolled away. "Good luck," he shouted. "You too," I called back. I started walking again, and this time it didn't feel so long. I finally spotted Building B. I walked in, found room 114, and peeked through the door window. There it was, the right class. People were chatting, smiling, waiting for the professor. I took another deep breath and walked in, quietly this time. The professor smiled at me and said, "Welcome. You must be new." I nodded, smiling back, "Yeah, first day." She pointed toward a seat by the window. "Make yourself comfortable. We're just getting started." I sat down, feeling relief wash over me. For the first time that day, I felt like I was exactly where I was supposed to be. The girl sitting next to me leaned over and whispered, "You look like you've been through a lot already." I laughed and said, "You have no idea." She smiled warmly. "Don't worry, it gets easier." The professor started talking about the syllabus, about reading lists and assignments, but I wasn't really listening. I was just soaking in the moment, the soft hum of the projector, the sound of pages turning, the sunshine spilling through the window. I thought about how just half an hour ago I wanted to disappear, and now I was smiling. College was already teaching me something, and it wasn't from a textbook. It was teaching me how to get lost and still find my way. By the end of the class, I'd even raised my hand once, my voice a little shaky but confident enough. When the professor dismissed us, I walked out feeling taller, lighter. I knew that someday I'd laugh about this morning. Maybe I'd even tell the story to someone else who walked into the wrong class. And maybe, just maybe, that would make them feel a little less alone. After my first real class was over, I felt proud but completely exhausted, like my brain had run a marathon. My stomach finally reminded me that I hadn't eaten anything all day, so I followed the crowd toward the cafeteria. The smell of coffee and pizza hit me as soon as I walked in, and for a second I just stood there, overwhelmed. The place was huge, full of people talking, laughing, scrolling on their phones. Everyone seemed to already have a group, a routine, a place they belonged. I grabbed a sandwich and wandered around, pretending to look for someone I knew, but of course, I didn't know anyone. Every table was full, and I didn't want to interrupt. Finally, I spotted an empty corner table near the window. I sat down, took a deep breath, and told myself, "It's fine. You're just eating. Alone. Totally fine." I tried to scroll through my phone like I had important texts, but it was just me and my mom's last message saying, "Good luck, honey." I smiled, then looked up again. That's when it happened. A girl with curly red hair walked by carrying her tray. She paused, looked at me, and said, "Hey, are you new here?" I froze for a second, then nodded. "Yeah, first day." She smiled brightly. "Mind if I sit with you?" My heart instantly lifted. "Please," I said, maybe too quickly, but she laughed and sat down. Her name was Lily, and within 5 minutes, we were already talking like old friends. She told me about her first week, how she got lost 3 times, and even called her mom crying. I admitted my wrong classroom story, and she laughed so hard she almost spilled her drink. It felt so good to laugh too, to realize that everyone goes through the same awkward beginnings. Soon, 2 more people from her class joined us, Jake and Mia, and suddenly I wasn't eating alone anymore. We talked about everything: professors, dorms, bad coffee, and the weird sculptures outside the library. I couldn't believe how fast things could change. An hour ago, I was lost and embarrassed. Now I was laughing with people who might actually become my friends. Before we left, Lily said, "Hey, we usually sit here around noon. You should join us tomorrow." I smiled so wide it hurt. "I'd love that." As I walked out of the cafeteria, I felt lighter, happier, like something inside me had shifted. For the first time that day, I didn't feel like the lost freshman anymore. I felt like a part of something, even if it was just a small lunch table by the window. That's when it hit me: the real lessons in college don't always happen in classrooms. Sometimes they start with someone saying, "Hey, mind if I sit with you?" By the second week of college, I was starting to feel more comfortable. I knew where my classes were, I stopped checking the map every 5 minutes, and I even started to recognize a few familiar faces around campus. Lily and I were sitting together in English literature almost every day, and our lunch group had become my favorite part of the day. But one morning, our professor announced something that made my stomach twist. "Next week," she said, "each of you will give a short presentation about a book that means something to you." The word presentation echoed in my head like a thunderclap. I'd always hated speaking in front of people. Even in high school, my voice would shake, my hands would sweat, and I'd forget half of what I wanted to say. I glanced at Lily, who whispered, "You'll be fine." But I didn't feel fine at all. For days, I overthought every detail: what book to choose, what to say, how not to sound boring. I even practiced in my dorm room in front of the mirror, but every time, I messed something up. The night before the presentation, I couldn't sleep. My brain kept replaying every possible embarrassing scenario. What if I forgot my words? What if people laughed? What if the professor thought I was terrible? The next morning, as I walked to class, my heart was pounding so hard I could almost hear it. When my turn came, I stood up slowly, clutching my notes like they were my lifeline. My hands were shaking, and for a second, I thought I might just run out of the room again, just like that first day. But then I saw Lily smiling at me from the second row, mouthing, "You got this." So I took a deep breath and started speaking. The first few words came out weak and shaky, but then something amazing happened. I stopped thinking about myself. I started thinking about the story I was telling, about why I loved that book, about how it made me feel. The class was quiet, listening, and somehow that gave me strength. When I finished, the professor smiled and said, "Thank you. That was lovely." A few people even clapped. My heart felt like it was flying. It wasn't a big speech, it wasn't perfect, but I'd done it. I'd faced something that used to terrify me and survived. When class ended, Lily gave me a high five. "Told you," she said. "You were great." I laughed and said, "I almost passed out." She grinned. "That's what growth feels like." Walking out of that classroom, I felt taller, lighter, more confident. It wasn't just about speaking in front of people. It was about realizing that fear doesn't disappear, but it doesn't have to control you. That small victory gave me something stronger than confidence. It gave me proof that I could do hard things, even when I was scared. A month later, I was sitting on the same bench where I had eaten my first lonely lunch, watching the campus buzz with life. It was crazy to think how much had changed in just a few weeks. The girl who once got lost between buildings and ran out of the wrong classroom was now laughing with friends, giving presentations, and actually enjoying every new challenge. College wasn't what I expected. It wasn't all about grades or schedules or fancy words from textbooks. It was about moments. Tiny, messy, beautiful moments that taught me who I was and who I wanted to be. I thought about that first day again, the panic, the embarrassment, the sound of that chair scraping across the floor. Back then, it felt like the end of the world. Now, it made me laugh. Because that moment, as awkward as it was, became the start of everything. It reminded me that failure isn't something to fear, it's something to learn from. I looked at the students rushing by, some smiling, some nervous, some completely lost, and I wanted to tell them, "Hey, you're gonna be okay." Everyone feels lost at first. If someone had told me that on my first day, maybe I would have believed it, or maybe I needed to figure it out myself. Either way, I finally understood that college, like life, doesn't come with a perfect map. You'll take wrong turns, walk into wrong rooms, meet the wrong people, and yet somehow all those wrong turns lead you to the right place. I smiled when Lily texted, "Lunch," and I typed back, "On my way." I looked around one more time before heading toward the cafeteria. The fountain sparkled in the sunlight, music floated from somewhere nearby, and the air felt full of possibility. For the first time, I wasn't rushing, I wasn't checking directions. I just walked, confident and calm. Maybe that was the real change. I had learned that confidence doesn't come from being perfect. It comes from getting lost, falling, laughing at yourself, and trying again. It comes from surviving the small embarrassments and realizing that no one's really watching as closely as you think. As I walked into the cafeteria and saw Lily waving from our table, I felt that warm, familiar sense of belonging. My wrong classroom story had turned into my favorite memory, the one that reminded me to keep showing up, keep trying, keep laughing. So if there's one lesson I've learned, it's this: sometimes, the best parts of life begin with a mistake. And that's exactly how my first day in college, my most embarrassing, chaotic, unforgettable day, became the start of everything right.